right, part three in our chapter three, food safety. This is when we're going to talk about preventing those foodborne illnesses. Remember, that is the most important thing that we are trying to do. So, a couple of ways. Proper food handling and preparation. We're going to talk about washing our hands, when to do it. We're going to talk about when to keep things clean as we're cooking. It's always important that when you come home from the grocery store that you rinse off your fruits and your vegetables right away and get them ready to store in the refrigerator or wherever it's safe. Washing your hands frequently, often, and for a long enough period of time. Don't cook food when you're not feeling well. Now in lab you're required to be there, but there are weeks when you have less contact with food, and that should be your job that day if you are feeling ill. Making sure that we have everything at the right temperature. You should have a food thermometer at home, and you should be using it regularly during the lab. And then how to store food properly so that bacteria and viruses and molds do not grow and flourish. Um, there's several organizations that monitor our food safety. We have the FDA, which is a Food Drug Administration. We have the CDC. Um, the USDA also has an inspection service, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services are all part of that. And those organizations working together have periodically updated something they call the Food Code. The most recent one was from 2009, which specifically identifies 5 areas that are high risk for food contamination. That includes holding temperatures, meaning storage or cooking. Um, it talks about contaminated equipment and how to keep that clean. It talks about safe food sources, where you purchase your food, if it's safe, and where it's imported from. And then the really important one, the personal hygiene monitoring. Another organization, and we'll go to this website just briefly, but I want you to kind of play around with it on your own, is something called the Food Back Program. And this has basically 4 areas that you really should focus on for food safety. There are some other quick tips that are in here, like you don't rinse raw chicken because you can have some problems with getting salmonella really big time in there. Always use soap. Don't just use sanitizer when you're washing your hands, because that's not going to get rid of all the bacteria. It talks about improper temperatures to store things. So there's lots of little tips and tidbits for this. This is the symbol for the food back. It talks about cleaning, so washing your hands appropriately. It talks about separating, which we'll talk to you about here in a minute, where you have different cutting boards for meats and for veggies. Cooking foods to the appropriate temperature and keeping them cool when they're supposed to be cool. So we'll talk about all those things, but the food back program is pretty interesting. And if you're ever working with schools or children, that is an important place to go to for some neat little handouts for the kids. So for food handler hygiene, always wash hands with soap and hot water, not lukewarm water, not cold water, and it needs to be soap, and you need to wash for at least 20 seconds. In fact, some people will say do the ABCs in your head if you have to. Anytime that you are getting ready to cook food, if you're going to lab and you're the one going to gather the food for the recipes, wash your hands first. If you're pulling out equipment that you're going to cook with or prep food with, always wash your hands first. If you touch your hair, put it behind your ear, pull it back in a ponytail, fluff it, whatever you might be doing. Or if you blow your nose or sneeze, any of those times you should wash your hands again. If you go to the bathroom, you should always wash your hands. That should be a pretty no-brainer there. And anytime you touch any sort of raw food, you need to make sure that you are washing your hands. Now, we will have disposable gloves in lab, but here's the caution. Gloves are not to protect you, they're to protect the food. So if you have a pair of gloves and you touch some food, a raw food, or any type of food that you're working with, those gloves are done. You have to take them off and get brand new gloves. It's just like washing your hands. And come to the labs clean. We talked about that the first day of class when we talk about making sure you come clean, clean fingernails, clean clothes, clean hair, because any sort of bacteria that might be on you or viruses that might be on you from walking, around campus or sitting in classrooms, it can make you sick, and it can make the food sick as well. And then there will be times in the class where you're tasting the food. If you do use a spoon to taste the food, you need to put it away and clean it. You don't re-taste with the same spoon. Gross. Other kitchen safety things. You should really kind of wipe down everything before you use it or right after so that it's clean for the next use. So we will be wiping down the counters before every lab just to make sure that everything is clean. We don't know who comes in and out of there a lot of times, so we want to make sure that it's clean. Cutting boards, you should have at least two because you should have one for fruits and veggies and you should have one for meats. And I have one that's even for meats that are cooked and meats that are raw, just so I can prevent even further contamination. One of the things that we'll talk a lot about is cross-contamination. So if I were to cut up a raw piece of chicken on a cutting board and think I wash it well and then I cut up cucumbers, it's still easy from the bacteria from the chicken to get on the cutting board and then to cross or to contaminate further the cucumber that I just cut up. So cross-contamination is really, really important. Floors and incidental surfaces. So your floors should be clean as well because bacteria will thrive in a dirty environment. And obviously if food falls on the floor, it is out. You should not put it back up there and cook with it further. I don't care if there's a 3-second rule, not in this lab. Incidental surfaces are, other types of equipment that sit out, like your coffee maker or the top of your stove or the top of your microwave. All those surfaces should be clean because they will collect dust, they will collect mold, they will collect bacteria, and it should be kept clean as well. Your storage areas should be clean, so your cabinets should be clean. They shouldn't have food just sitting around in there. Your refrigerators should be clean. All these areas will collect bacteria, and we don't want to cross-contaminate by storage. Now let's talk a little bit about temperatures, and all these cooking temperatures and details on this are in your book, and you will need to have your book for lab so that you can have these right temperatures. But you want to make sure you always have a clean thermometer. Now I have different ones. There's a picture. This one says do not put in water. All the ones we have in lab you can put in water. But the final temperatures are really important, and that's where you have to cook the food to, particularly meats, and hold it there sometimes for 5 to 10 minutes depending on the type of meat. So for example, if I'm cooking any sort of ground meat like ground beef, I need to cook it to about 160 degrees. Something like chicken, I'll have to cook to about 165. And again, that's because the bacteria that's in there sometimes can be resistant to the heat. And so you may need to cook it at higher temperatures for longer periods of time. We also have the temperatures that are the danger zone, the temperatures we want to avoid at all costs because they allow for bacteria to thrive. And those are the temperatures between 40 and 140 degrees. Anything in that area is going to allow for bacterial growth. And so they can be in there for an hour, not recommended, but for a total of 2 hours, then that's it. That food is infected, it needs to be thrown out. So for example, let's say you're at a potluck or you're at a barbecue and you've been making pasta salad and the pasta salad sits on your counter for 15-20 minutes while you're cooking it and you put it in the refrigerator, but then you take it out later when people come home and it's out for an hour. That means that right now it's been out for an hour and 15 minutes. You cannot have a food in that danger zone for 2 hours. So if during that time from prep to storage, then back out again, it's out for 2 hours, that needs to be thrown away. It is done. That is the rule for food. Now you want to make sure that certain high-risk foods, the ones we talked about, like the chickens, like the meats, like the dairy-based foods, that sometimes is a limited less than 2 hour rule just because they're more high-risk foods than others. You want to make sure that you're storing food, you're not taking it out of the fridge, you're not cooking it until it's ready for service. Sometimes you can have more contamination if it sits out longer. Protein foods should be if they're served cold, should be chilled until served. So that means lunch meat or deli meat. That means chicken salad. If you're going to serve that cold, it needs to stay in that refrigerator till right immediately before it's being served. And the one thing about protein, because it's such a strong contaminant food, because the bacteria loves what's in that meat as much as we do, you have to make sure that it doesn't have all those cut surfaces. So sometimes you want to keep it in the big chunk of chicken before you cut it up to serve it, just because the more cuts you have on that, the more bacteria you introduce. Leftovers should be refrigerated promptly as soon as you're finished with them. And again, you have a 3-day rule. After 72 hours, the leftovers are over. If you have made something large, let's say you make a really huge pot of chili and you only ate some of it and you're going to save the rest for the next couple of days, you cannot store it in one big huge bowl. The temperature does not drop low enough, below the 40 degrees at a fast enough period of time. So you must separate out that chili so that the internal temperature can get below 40 degrees much faster. Your freezer should always be 0 degrees or less. Your refrigerator side should always be less than 40. Closer to 32 would probably be better if you can get it there. Chill fresh produce if it's needed. A lot of times if you let it sit on the counter, it's going to develop mold. There should be in your refrigerator a drawer maybe that has a moisture controlled. Sometimes less moisture is beneficial because it reduces the amount of mold that can grow. Those are sometimes called hydrator drawers. Your potatoes and your squashes should be stored in cool, dry places, so a drawer or a potato bin to keep any sort of mold and bacteria from growing. You don't want to purchase something too far in advance that you're not going to use, something like onions or potatoes, which can go bad very quickly and get mold on them, or something you may not want to buy in bulk if you're not planning to use it anytime soon. And again, your storage areas should be kept clean. You should not be storing anything on the floor because it just introduces more bugs and bacteria in there. It should be at least 6 to 12 inches off the floor if you're storing your foods. And that concludes chapter 3. Now again, we will go through the temperatures a lot more in class, and we'll be doing some activities and continuing this on in the labs as we go through the semester.